All right. Wow. Hello. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. And today we have, well, I'm John Galloway. I'm on the .NET community team and help host this show. Let's all say hi real quick. Damian?
Hello, I'm Damian, and I'm on the .NET PM team, but most of my background is in ASP.NET.
Cool. Dan?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Roth. I'm a program manager on the ASP.NET team.
Awesome. And then Artak, I don't think you've been on the show before.
I haven't. This is my first time,
welcome.
And thank you. I'm the engineering manager for ASP.NET Frameworks team, and that covers ASP.NET MVC and Blazor.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this show over 6 years now. Some people have been watching for a long time. But somebody pointed out recently that, people pop on new every week, and, it's great to just say hi and let you know. So we're going to be talking about planning for .NET 6 and kind of an early look at how you manage the backlog. So
Artak people in the chat are like, we're finally getting to meet Artak. they know you, but they haven't met you yet. This is a great moment.
This is amazing.
This is always a deep fake.
It's always cool to get new people on here, and especially like people that like you see all the time on GitHub, and it's like it's nice to say hi. So I'm going to jump right into the community links because they're awesome. Let's go.
I was going to say .NET loves community. That's how out of practice I am. I was meant to say John loves community.
I think both. We can say both are true.
Yeah, that's true. We could just say both.
All right, let's jump right in. So first of all, Shane, wow, that's interesting. It hid his thing, but they're starting a 12-factor application series on the Cloud Native show. So Shane Donovan and Glenn Condren are going to be starting in November. So I'm interested in this.
Donovan Brown, but tweeted by Shane Morris.
Shane Boyer.
So I think you said, I think we all got the names wrong. Shane Boyer tweeted it, but it's by Donovan Brown and Glenn Condren.
Oh, Glenn Condren, but he says, please join me, Donovan and Glenn.
So it's Condren. Shane Boyer, not Shane Brown. I think you said Shane Brown.
Did I say Shane Brown? I
just need to drink more coffee and shut up.
It could be. I don't know. I would have got away with it if it wasn't for that. So this looks neat. I'm interested to see this. I've heard podcasts and stuff about this 12-factor thing, but I'm eager to see them dig into that. So that looks cool. Franz Boma just announced this yesterday. So this is HND 3.0. So what's interesting here is he's been producing LLBL Gen for forever, and it's a data code generator thing. Does all kinds of advanced stuff for, making it easier to access and deal with your database. I probably said that very terribly wrong, but it's a very advanced product. What's cool is he uses HND and his team uses HND for their support forums internally. And so he has released this, and he's showing here he talks about the history of it, and he also talks about it's released as open source. And he talks about, here's how it's built, how it's architected, digs through all the security stuff. So what's neat here is two things, I think. One is, as a product, it's interesting and good to know about. And then two, just as a real world, like this is a .NET production application where you can see the source code, see how it's built, and see, and he cares deeply about data architecture and stuff. And so it's really cool to see as he digs through and explains, how he set it all up and architected it. So congrats to Franz, and interesting post.
Sharing that, yeah.
A few, so I actually saw this on Twitter this morning, and, I think we need to make it easier to share links out to us. And that's something where I've been looking at setting up a forum for it where people can pass stuff in, but you can always at me on Twitter. And I love to share links, especially ones that, I hadn't seen before. It's great to just let me know if you see something. So this is cool from Niels. We've got a few cool Blazor ones, and feel free, of course, Dan or anyone to jump in and clarify if I say something wrong, but here he talks about pushing UI changes from Blazor server to the browser. And one really cool thing about Blazor server is that you have the SignalR connection. So you're actually running code on the server and you have a SignalR connection that's just for free set up for you. So he talks about how that works, but he does say, Blazor server is not going to automatically re-render the components. Then he also points out that there are thread issues that you have to understand. So he talks about a server-raised event sample. He has a timer running. This is on the server, and then he's updating on the client. And so this is updating every second on the client from the server. So he talks about how to do this, and then he also does point out that, let me see, he talks about using invoke async to call state has changed. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right. Like Blazor in general will have some heuristics where it will assume that your state has probably changed and it will re-render components for you. But in general, the model is very much like React, where if you have a state change inside your component, the framework doesn't generally know that. So you have to tell the framework. And then if you have events that are happening like on a separate thread, Blazor has a synchronization context. So you need to get back onto that context in order to re-render the UI when like a timer goes off or some event comes from someplace else. So you use that invoke async method to get back on the context. So yeah, that's good stuff.
Cool. He also points out the Blazor event aggregator, which is a library that can make that simpler too. Okay. So yeah, the whole event aggregator pattern, like it makes it easier to kind of do a pub sub style.
I will say that I would love to see us lean into this pattern a little bit more in Blazor server and actually improve the developer experience for building these types of apps. I think there's the SignalR connection isn't exposed to you in any way. So you can't add methods to a hub, for example, that's behind it. You have to layer your own SignalR hub into your Blazor server app if you want to. And then unfortunately, you're actually got two connections effectively, except one is between the browser and the server, and then one is between the server and the server, which is a little unfortunate. And that can cause scale issues if you're not careful with it. And so I would love to see us somehow expose the fact that there is a real-time connection between the browser or wherever the rendering is happening and the Blazor server components running on the server. And it's an interesting, I think it raises some interesting opportunities for app model sort of changes that we could do. So obviously, if you're just doing it with components, which is what's happening here, you raise an event, you push it, you make a component change, and then you rely on the framework to push it. That's obviously a start, but there's a whole bunch of semantics that SignalR gives you that just aren't replicated here, like groups, for example, or addressing an individual client. And you don't get any of that. You would have to recreate all that again from scratch, which is a little unfortunate. And it'd be really cool, I think, for us to dive into this a little more and try and tease these patterns out and then make them available as first-class principles in Blazor server. There's no plan to do that currently, as I'm aware of, but I would, if you care about that, segue into our
yeah,
great to discuss for .NET.
An issue, or find the issue, upload it, or whatever, or say Damian sent me. I want this in the app model.
Cool. All right, I got a few more Blazor things. So Blazor Mr. Magoo, who's on the chat, he talked about this as an interesting idea. So he is in his component base for his components. He's just adding in a stopwatch. So pretty lightweight. And then he does say you'll want to turn this off in production. But what's cool with this is just getting this console information shows all the timing. And he said that using this, he was able to go into, he updated on Twitter later. He said he went into several things, like he has a forum, updated it, and like it was immediately obvious to see which things were slowing down the component renders. And then he fixed those and sped it way up. So I thought that was a nice quick tip. And he talked about using a common component base, and it makes it easy to put that sort of stuff in. So
nice. Thank you, Mr. Magoo.
Yep. Okay, Benjamin talking about printing PDFs in Blazor. So he does a roundup of several different options for printing PDFs. He looks at some of the different alternatives that are out there. He ended up using printjs. I do see that pattern quite a bit. People are finding existing really nice web framework, JavaScript libraries, and then wrapping them up. And so he has based it on that and then built forward. He said, there are some caveats to it, but generally it's able to print, and it's building on the printjs support. So that's pretty cool. John Hilton talking about pre-rendering your Blazor WASM application with .NET 5. And so he's got a relatively deep dive, some nice diagrams here. I will be completely honest, I still get lost with Blazor pre-rendering. I'm on a chat that you're on, Dan, and I'm like always struggling to keep up a bit. So I think the series is nice. Yeah,
it's not that bad. I mean, there are some gotchas with Blazor, particularly the new WebAssembly pre-rendering that you need to be aware of. But I mean, the conceptual model is right. We have client-side rendering in the browser, and we have the ability to also render stuff on the server, which we've had forever, like with MVC and Razor pages. And all pre-rendering is like, hey, let's go ahead and run the components on the server. We've got them. We can run .NET code on the server. Let's generate the HTML up front so that the client gets pixels as soon as possible while we're wiring up the interactivity in the background, whether it's the WebAssembly runtime or the SignalR connection. So I think that part conceptually shouldn't be, hopefully it's not too overloading. Things where it get a little tricky is like, getting that experience to be really smooth, not having like UI flashes is often something that people find they hit when they try to wire up pre-rendering. Like if you're doing something asynchronous during your component logic, then you might pre-render on the server and that'll look great. And then the components will do their async stuff. When Blazor sees that an async work has happened, it will immediately kick off a render. So you have an opportunity to put like loading spinners and stuff. But that render won't have the data yet, and so it'll usually like blast away the DOM that was just nicely pre-rendered, and you'll see this flash that goes away, and then it comes back again. And so there's some trickery you sometimes need to do to have the data already available, so you avoid those types of problems. And that's another one of those areas for .NET 6 that we want to make more seamless, more easier. You can do it today with some code, but it's definitely an area that we want to improve the experience on.
Very cool. Okay. Well, yeah, I saw a lot of positive feedback about this, and he's got a 3-part series going on here, so very nice, cool. I'll try and hurry through because I want to give you folks enough time here. We've also got a cool thing from PeachPie. They announced this apps.peachpie.io, and the idea here is to make it easy to consume PHP projects from C#. So they've got some listed here. And so like, for instance, if you want to use ASCII math text to .NET, like, so this is a port of the PHP and, using PeachPie, and then they've got these examples here. So a nice just kind of way to expose and kind of a bridge for all these PHP libraries in .NET. So. Okay, here's Gerald, and he's continuing a series about testing, and here he's talking about automated unit tests with Playwright and XUnit. So just the whole kind of, I was looking into this recently, like all the different ways the automation options you have, and there are several. So this is interesting, the integration with Playwright, so using Playwright Sharp and using XUnit, and then actually automating and doing a full automated unit test. And they serve, really kind of different things. You can do a unit test of your code, but when you're doing things that are interacting with the browser and, testing loading, timing, and all that kind of stuff, it can get complex. So this is good. I'm looking forward to seeing more in the series here. And with that, I'm ready to turn over to you folks. So I saw this go out last week, and I was like, hey, why don't we just talk about it with the community? And you all said, yeah. And so here we go. Sounds
great. To set a little context here first, because I want to kind of dampen some expectations. Like we want to talk about yeah, right, exactly. So we want to talk about .NET 6 planning, but we're like at the beginnings in some sense of .NET, at least in the throes of .NET 6 planning right now. So if anyone on the call is expecting to have the full roadmap for .NET 6, like what's all the new stuff that's coming, we're not there yet. We're still trying to figure that out. And so actually the point of this community stand-up was more, how can you get involved? Like, how can you see what we're doing as part of our .NET 6 planning, and how can you participate in that? We very much care about the community being involved in our planning efforts, and we want you to know what channels we're currently looking at, and maybe you have some ideas about how we can better listen to those things. So there's no like big reveal here. Sorry if you're hoping to know like all the features we're doing for .NET 6. In terms of roadmap for the plan, I know the roadmap for the roadmap, we're shooting for like, imagine like early next year is where we're hoping to publish a ASP.NET Core in .NET 6 roadmap for what are we going to be doing. That's about the time frame we're looking at. So we're in the middle of planning, don't have a done plan. That said, we want to give you guys a little bit of context, you folks, a little bit of context about what .NET 6 is about, at least as far as we know. It is still early, so things are evolving and changing, and everything I say now is subject to change, so don't write it in stone. But we have already said that, of course, the .NET releases are yearly releases. .NET 5 is coming up. The RC2 release should be shipping momentarily, so that should be out. You may have seen the NuGet packages start to fly up to NuGet.org. .NET 5 is basically wrapping up and will ship in November of this year. Make sure you join us for the .NET Conf event. .NET 6 is then a year later. Like we're on a year cadence for all of our releases. So we're basically planning a year-long release. And we do have some like general themes that we're thinking about for .NET 6. And these themes, even the made broad themes, are still being heavily discussed. You know, some areas that we really care about that we want to invest in. We want to appeal to new .NET devs, like smooth out the on-ramp to .NET and make it appeal to a broader audience. We know with .NET Core that we, of course, appeal to our existing .NET audience, and that's great. And we're trying to add more value to those developers. But we want to make sure also that .NET is appealing to as broad a set of folks as possible, coming from diverse backgrounds, and that they have a really good getting started experience, and not too many concepts thrown at them that they haven't seen before. Try and smoothly get them onto the stack as much as possible. .NET 6 is going to be an LTS release, so that's going to be great. That'll mean that you'll have a supported release for another 3 years after the previous LTS release will be .NET Core 3.1. We want to make sure that it's really enterprise ready, that upgrading from .NET to .NET is as smooth an experience as possible. Cloud native is a big theme for .NET. You may have seen efforts like TIE that make working with .NET and systems like Kubernetes and containers, making that easier during your local development, and also easier to get your apps into those types of environments. We're trying to do a bunch of work in that space. Ongoing investments, of course, in reducing app size and improving performance. A big area that we want to look at for .NET 6 is improving the developer inner loop. By inner loop, we mean that iterative experience where you're editing your code and you want to see the changes as fast as possible. Damian's actually very heavily involved in that space and is driving the effort. So if you have lots of questions about what are we thinking about doing there, like what do we think about hot reload, I'm sure Damian will have great thoughts to share about that. And then lastly, the last theme I just wanted to share is about the ecosystem. There's a lot of discussion going on about how can we better support the open source ecosystem? How can we better enable customers and developers to take advantage of great third-party open source components? We're shipping more of those. Like we just in .NET 5, we updated our web API template, for example, to take advantage of Swashbuckle for the open API support. We want to enable more of that and have that trust that you can feel as good about taking dependencies on third-party components as you would from something that came from Microsoft. So those are just some broad themes, and I know that's fairly amorphous. It's not super specific yet, and that's just kind of where we're at. But hopefully it gives you some framing of things that are top of mind for us. And then what we wanted to do today is go into more detail about, for ASP.NET Core, how are we actually then doing this planning exercise? How are we taking those themes and looking at our backlog and evaluating, okay, like which of these things do we want to do next? What signals are we looking for from users like you to decide which features are top of our stack? If you care about a particular area, how can you get involved there? Like where should you put your feedback? Where should you get involved with the design discussions and pull requests and all those things? And so with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Artak. I hate to say, I'm going to have to drop off in just about 10 minutes here because I have a conflict. But Artak is here as our, the engineering lead for a good chunk of ASP.NET Core, is going to show a little bit about how we've been thinking about our backlog.
Thank you, Dan. So recently, we've introduced a tool to help us with planning, and it helps us get a better view into the GitHub issues, and try to better understand what we need to do. And we use that tool as simply one input for our decisions, not actually a definite guide like, hey, this is the things we need to work on. So let me share the view I have in that tool, and we can go there. 1 second. Okay, can you see this?
Yep.
I think you can. Perfect. So what this tool does, it actually just queries GitHub ASP.NET Core repo issues and shows the existing data we have in GitHub based on the labels in like ready to prioritize and ready to judge order adapted to our needs. Okay, you can see the only information which is missing in GitHub is this score, and this score we calculate is based on multiple factors for each issue. So for certain issues, for each issue, we try to go and make certain calls regarding what is the audience the specific issue impacts, like how big that audience is. That's the first one. And the second call we make is, given the audience, how bad that issue prevents them from adopting certain feature, or how much does it block them? And you can see the most and major labels in here. These map to some relevant, slightly differently named labels in GitHub, but these are the labels which contribute to the final score. And then based on this score, you can see how like most important issues based on community upvoting and comments have been brought up on this list. So we'll later use this again as just an input. This is not a different call, and we start going through from top to bottom to understand what are the things we will be working on during each next milestone. So there is also a small change we're trying to do in the .NET 6 timeframe. Like if people who have been following us and our like issues in GitHub during .NET 5, you have seen the next sprint planning milestone, which we used heavily and relied on heavily. We are trying to get away from having two backlog milestones, and we will have a single, just simple backlog milestone, and you utilize more of this tool to help us differentiate between things we will do in .NET 6 timeframe and things we want. And just to clarify, like Dan earlier mentioned that we will be publishing roadmap for .NET 6. That doesn't mean we're going to do a waterfall type of approach for the whole year. We are just going to pick up the biggest investments for .NET 6, and we still are going to have monthly monthly planning meetings, where we will come back to this list and pick up another set of issues based on recent changes in community needs and prioritize things, like especially smaller enhancements has been included in our deliverables exactly the same way. In 5.0, you may recall the Blazor roadmap, for example, issue. There we have had listed, I don't know, 20 maximum issues we would work on, but we have delivered at least 50 enhancements throughout for 5.0. And these smaller ones come each milestone, and if it makes sense, if it helps community a lot, we will just do it.
Two quick things. Can you zoom in a bit? It's hard for people to see, especially on like smaller screens.
Probably just zoom the browser.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep. There you go. One other question is, so some projects use GitHub projects to show kind of, and you can see where things are at in there. Is that something that you use here? Is that something what are your thoughts on? Yeah.
So we use GitHub projects, but not for this. GitHub project has certain limitations. And yes, there is stack ranking, but it's very hard to keep them up because it is manual. Whereas the order by score here is calculated automatically based on, for example, the number of upvotes of an issue, the number of comments, the number of participants, and factors like this.
So I find one thing I found really interesting is, with the ASMIC core repo, as we look at like upvotes and reactions, like for a while we've noticed that the number of reactions that we've gotten hasn't been like a huge amount. Like when we look at some other repos, like even the .NET runtime repo, EF core repo, or third-party repos, we've noticed that the communities there tend to get very involved with upvotes, and you'll see like hundreds of upvotes on a particular issue. So one thing we're trying to work on to try and address is to at least communicate to our community folks like you that we are actually looking at upvotes. So if you care about an issue, it does matter if you click the upvote button. That is something that we are considering. We are looking at the issues where there seems to be a lot of community interest based on the number of comments. And these aren't the only things we look at. And it's certainly not a contract that if you upvote something to the top, that it's going to definitely get done. And we understand these systems can be gamed, and we hope people will be respectful of the measurement we're trying to get here. But it is something that we use, and it is helpful to us. So if there is an issue that you're like, yeah, I hit that too, great, it's already filed. Make sure you go ahead and click an upvote in the ASMIC core repo, because that is very helpful for us to know that, oh, okay, there was another real person, a real dev out there that hit this problem.
Can you show that? We've got a question coming in here. Is it like just what is the workflow? Like, can you click through on one of these issues and show what that?
Yeah, some folks have never GitHub doesn't have an official upvote feature. They have what are they called? Engagement.
Thumbs up reactions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. Do a reaction.
We're not attaching any meaning to the type of reaction with this tool, are we? Like, are we looking at downvote? Are we actually treating like the thumbs up as an upvote and the thumbs down as a downvote and offsetting those, and like the rocket and the eyes? Like, people use the different reactions
to mean different things. I think we're currently just looking at +1s, I believe. I think we're only looking at thumbs up.
Oh, we literally look at the thumbs up. Okay.
I believe so. I mean, we can double check that. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe that. And we're not doing anything fancy with like subtracting the downvotes or something like that. But go ahead and click on if you click on the little smiley face in the upper right. Yeah. So that's the type of stuff that we're asking people to use as a way to give us some signal. And feel free also to comment. Like, we are also looking at just comments on the issue. That's, again, it's a noisy signal. We know sometimes issues just get lots of discussion on them, and it's not necessarily indicative that people care about it. But if you have some information to share with us about why this issue is important, and you post a comment, that does help us know, okay, someone, again, cares about this, and it helps us understand why.
That's really helpful, actually, especially if you've had discussions about choosing a stack. Maybe you've been looking at other SPA frameworks. In the case of Blazor or something, you're like, wow, the lack of this thing in Blazor is really a problem for us right now. That's useful sort of customer information for us. Like, otherwise, we can assume that is true of some folks, but actually having the concrete comment that is true for you really, really does help us. Or if there's anything else that this is preventing you going live because we have this type of requirement, or the performance of this area is so bad right now that I lose X hours, a week in productivity, or whatever it might be. Like, and be genuine, obviously. But those type of things really do help us prioritize when it comes to trying to balance these. Like, I would hope that most people understand and appreciate this is a very difficult process for a team like the ASP.NET team to try and prioritize the work for a release like this. You know, we do one release a year. It's used by millions of people. We're trying to balance sort of business strategic type of investments that, you know, somewhat flow top down. And we talk about top down planning and bottom up planning internally. And I'm sure those aren't, you know, unique terms to Microsoft. That's a fairly standard thing. Top down planning are things where the directors or the VPs will set direction and they want us to focus on a particular opportunity or a particular problem that they've identified, and that gets pushed down through, and then they want us to say, hey, you know, this is how we're going to help address that, or, you know, develop towards that goal. And then we have bottom up, which is more what we're talking about here, which is people log issues directly on GitHub, and we want to be able to fit those into the work that we do. Or the team would like to take the product in this direction as the product owners for ASP.NET. But remember, ASP.NET is part of a larger product. It's part of .NET, and ASP.NET sits up on top of the .NET runtime and the .NET BCL. And so they are they have their own agendas and they have their own you know, needs that they have to serve. And we all need to figure out how to prioritize our work together. And then sometimes we have large efforts that span lots of teams, and we have to coordinate priorities appropriately. You know, as an example, Dan mentioned inner loop performance. We want to make the development experience obviously as productive as it can be, and a lot of the time that just means make stuff faster. Just make it faster. Like, I made a code change and I saved it. How quick until I can see that code change in my app while I'm sitting here doing development? There's a lot of things that go into making that occur. It's definitely not something that just the so many person Blazor team can make work by themselves. They, you know, there's tooling underneath that, whether it's command line, there's MS Build, there's compilers, there's a separate Razor compiler to the C# compiler, there's a Visual Studio thing element, there's the editor, which is the thing that knows where the edits occurred. Like, there's a whole bunch of elements that go into figuring that out. And yeah, there's some simple things that we can do, like just make the build faster. We will obviously look at those type of things, but then there are more complicated things that will hopefully yield far better results, far more impactful results. Like, okay, if we didn't just try and focus on making the build faster, because there's obviously there's a ceiling as to, you know, that will hit there. What could we do to introduce maybe a new user experience? And hot reload is one that gets thrown around a lot, right? Because we see that in other frameworks, and so it's very desirable that you can, within certain constraints, I could make an edit and then get that component reloaded live, but those constraints are a trade-off, and so we need to kind of balance that with the existing experience. And so yeah, so that we have these sort of two elements. I think Dan enumerated some of the top-down themes for .NET 6, which we're in the middle of kind of planning and reviewing right now. Appealing to new developers, making the inner loop faster, making a good solid LTS release, which means trying to smooth out anything that from 5, and I'm focusing on folks moving from .NET Core 3.1 to .NET 6. That we need to make sure that that's as smooth as experience as possible. And there are a couple other themes as well. And then the bottom-up stuff, which is more, you know, close to what the customers are looking for. So.
Yeah. So another column I think is really interesting here is this type effects and severity column on this tool. I don't know if you want to show a little bit or talk a little bit about that, Artak, and what those things mean. Because in some sense, this information is even more important. Like how impactful is it for us to address this issue? How many people are actually being impacted by it is what these two things are. And these are things that we tag the issues with based on our own intuitions and what we've heard from users like you. And I think it's interesting to discuss, like, you know, how can we get better insights from the community about whether these assessments are actually correct? Like if the thumbs up helps us a little bit if it's affecting a lot of people, but really understanding the like blocking nature of the feature, like how many people really need to do this, and if we don't, you know, ship this functionality, then you're completely blocked. That type of discussion really comes from people publishing those really good comments, or when you open up an issue, like really doing a good job of describing what are you trying to do, what's not working, and how does that impact you in your life. That's where we're trying to capture some of that information with these two metrics. Artak, do you want to? I'm going to actually head out now, guys, but you're in good hands.
Thanks, Dan.
It's going to be amazing.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye.
So, as was mentioned a few times now, comments are very, very important to us too. And that is based on reading these comments is how we shape our understanding, as well as talking to some customers, how we are shaping our understanding regarding certain issues, like how much do they affect, how many customers do they affect, and how badly they affect them. And based on this overall understanding, we manually go ahead and modify this or set this metadata and associate them with each issue. And as I mentioned earlier, depending on these labels, the score changes accordingly. Of course, we chose the logic how to change it, but these are the main factors which impact the score. So definitely go ahead, share feedback about what are the scenarios you're using certain issues, or you're hitting roadblocks on, why they are important for you, and even share your own assessment of how bad that issue is, how many of your users are blocked due to this.
There's a question on here. This looks amazing, like a really amazing tool. I had a question if it's possible to share this so other people can use this as well, the tool that you're using for triaging.
So right now, we just adopted this. Steve Sanderson built this tool to help us out with this, and it is just maybe a week old only. I assume at some point, I don't exclude the possibility of this becoming an open source tool. Definitely will share the feedback with Steve. We'll see. I can't comment further.
Cool. Let me see. A lot of people are talking about specific things. Do you want to? So, Damian, you mentioned some kind of top-down areas, some kind of major themes. Yeah. Do we want to talk about any either bottom-up or top-down things to kind of clarify so people can help? So to help people understand how they can interact.
Yeah. So, like, I think obviously right now the focus publicly is much more largely on the upcoming release of .NET 5. And so you won't see a blog post about .NET 6 themes or anything until well after .NET 5 is released. But this is a community stand-up, so we often talk about what's going on week to week, day to day in the team. That's kind of what we do. But some of those top-down themes, as I mentioned, which are for all of .NET. This is not just for ASP.NET. They're not ASP.NET themes. We don't have ASP.NET themes as it is with our planning. We have .NET themes. And so, one of those, there's a theme that covers client development, right? What are we doing with regards to mobile development and desktop development? And there'll be more to talk about that, to say about that in the coming months. There's a theme that talks about building a stable LTS release. And what we need to do to ensure a good transition, a confident transition for folks running on Core 3.1 to 6, and the type of things that they expect out of that. There's also one that's focused on sort of our larger scale enterprise customers and their unique needs, and also our first party customers. So our first party customers are those at Microsoft who build services on .NET. And what we've seen in the last year is with the release of .NET Core 3.1, there was a much heightened interest in moving services at Microsoft to run on .NET Core. Obviously, there were already services at Microsoft running on .NET Core, but there's some very large established services. There was a blog post about Bing, for example, months ago, and their efforts to move to .NET Core. And some of the gains that they've seen. Well, that's happening more throughout the company. And so we've got actually a dedicated team that focuses on helping first-party customers move to .NET Core and now .NET 5 and .NET 6. And we get obviously lots of valuable information from them because we can work probably more closely with them than we can with any other company. And then everything we learn from them and everything we build or help them with just feeds into making .NET better for everyone. I know we often get the feedback that, especially with a lot of our frameworks, it's like, what is Microsoft using to build this? Because that's seen as a bit of a litmus test for how ready something is for the real world or how applicable it is. And it's fair to say that for much of there's been many cases where we have an app framework or we have a feature and we can't point to a public, highly used, highly distributed example from Microsoft of using that. And that can be an issue. I can totally understand why folks would want to see that type of thing. And so we hope to share more details about how we've been able to help some of these large first-party customers move their things to .NET and to .NET Core and .NET 5, and then how those things will help other folks. So that's been that's a really good resource that we have now as well. The inner loop theme is a big theme this year. Like, we do want to make large improvements in the developer experience with regards to performance, and that includes everything. Like I mentioned, everything from let's just make like the command line faster. Like today on my machine here, if I use the .NET CLI to build a console app after it's warm, like after I've run it a few times, the fastest it can build a Hello World console app incrementally, like I've already built it once and I'm just going to build it again, making no changes, is over a second. It takes over a second to do that. Which isn't slow, but it's not particularly fast given I didn't make any changes. You've already built it. Why can't you be faster than that? And if it was cold, if I hadn't run it on my machine already, or if I wasn't on a desktop, if I was on a laptop, or I was on maybe an older machine, we're getting reports and we've observed and we see outliers where it doesn't take 1 second, it can take 6 seconds or 7 seconds. And if you're a new user to .NET, that can be really impactful. Like, it's like, okay, well, I downloaded the SDK, that was fairly painless. I'm going through this 15-minute tutorial, and I do my first, .NET New, .NET Run, and it seems to be taking a really long time before I see the Hello World printout. And if I was to do the same thing with some other programming stacks and SDKs, you might get something a lot faster. Now, there's lots of mechanical differences as to why that is. Python and JavaScript are interpreted. There's no build phase. And so they get to excel in other areas that are much harder for us to do so, and we get to excel at areas that it's hard for them to do so. So
one idea, what if we just ship a precompiled Hello World console application?
So you're laughing. Like, that sounds funny, right? But that's not too far away from some of the ideas that have been discussed, because we need to find how can we smooth out that arc. And sometimes that means there's only so far we can turn the crank on making something as generic and flexible as the MS build and .NET CLI build system and the runtime and all the rest of it. It's a generalist. We ship a generalist framework. We are a generalist stack. That is kind of our thing, right? .NET does everything. You can build any type of app. You can plug in and customize the build system in any way. But that means there are certain architectural trade-offs about how that works that can introduce, make it hard to optimize, so to lower the floor, as we say, right? How fast can you get when you're doing nothing? Well, there's a limit to that, because we always have to expect that you might be doing something. What if we could somehow identify when you're not trying to do all those things very quickly, and then take a fast path, take an optimized path, right? And so we've been talking about things like that. Maybe not as far as there's a precompiled, we wrote it in C, hello world. Maybe not that, but maybe the CLI could have a stripped down mode that automatically is engaged for certain operations, but then passes through to like the full beans one, when you do need to do something that utilizes all that flexibility. We're talking about that type of stuff because we want that to be a smooth progression. And the other advantage of that type of design is you can start building out over time what you build into the optimized thing to expand its sort of footprint, the type of scenarios it covers based on feedback, based on what people are doing. Because it doesn't need to do everything. It only needs to do the things that people do a lot. And it turns out that if you were like to chart out all the different operations, like the number of operations that people do, and then how many people do those things, it generally doesn't look like a bell curve. It generally looks like there's a cluster of people right at the beginning, and that equates to maybe 70 to 80% of all the operations that occur during the inner loop. And then there's an incredibly long tail of all the other things that get done, which require all the flexibility and all the unknowns when you invoke the command about what's going to happen. So it wouldn't be great if we could really optimize that first part. And sometimes that creates that requires some creative architecture, some creative thinking. And so we're looking at those type of things.
I had a question come in from Francois, and he's asking, as this is getting baked into .NET 6, do we start to see some of these in point releases for .NET 5?
No, and then we made that very clear, I think, over the last couple of years, talking about what the new release cadence that we introduced with the release. after .NET Core 3.1, when we started talking about what's going to happen after that in the one.NET strategy. And that was slowed down a bit by the pandemic, and we kind of talked about that at Build this year. We had originally planned for .NET 5 to include the Xamarin workloads by default. And that didn't eventuate. We had to postpone some of that work. That work will be in 6 now. So the .NET CLI will support building Xamarin applications. We did get some stuff done for Xamarin though in 5 for the mono runtime using the core framework, so the BCL from .NET Core on the mono runtime as opposed to Mono's framework. That did happen. All right, so now they share the BCL between the workloads that use Mono, which are the Xamarin workloads, and Blazor WebAssembly, and the .NET Core based workloads. They all share the same BCL now. So that work happened, but in 6 we'll continue that work to pull them into the tool chain as well. So that in Visual Studio you'll use the same project system. You'll get the new clean CS proj files for your Xamarin apps and those type of stuff, and the CLI will support creating and building those as well. So that, as I said, that work continues. So.
Well, you mentioned projects. One of the cool things with .NET 5 is the dynamic project templates, and those kind of being pulled into like Visual Studio. Is there anything being tracked like from the high level theme or whatever as taking that further, like more look at how the project system works for pulling in, new different project types?
Yeah. So like, I think what you're alluding to is there's in an upcoming version of Visual Studio, I think it's in preview right now. You can enable it behind a flag. You can now, we're changing how the new .NET templates, the ones that come from the CLI, flow into Visual Studio. Up until now, we had to ship them in 2 places effectively. The CLI had its own templates and it had its own template engine, and you could install templates from NuGet packages. And then they would show up in the CLI, but they wouldn't show up in Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, we still had the one ASP.NET dialog where you would do file new ASP.NET application, and then you get a different screen, which we built using the Visual Studio template technology. And then you would choose a bunch of stuff, and then that would then go and run the templates from the CLI, but they were kind of, was like a hidden bookmarked VS, or what we call it, breadcrumb. We call it a breadcrumb template that's in Visual Studio so that it shows up in VS, but then we use a template wizard to basically invoke the one in the CLI. So that's all being overhauled so that moving forward, all the templates, whether they're running from the command line or in Visual Studio, are effectively based on the CLI template engine. And so you can enable this now in the latest preview. It's behind a flag. So one of the preview flags and tools options, you can have all the CLI templates show up in the Visual Studio new project dialog, or NPD, as we call it internally. And so if you do install a template from the command line via a NuGet package, it will show up in Visual Studio once you've enabled that. And then that magic screen that used to be after that to choose your version of .NET Core and to choose what type of ASP.NET Core template you were going to use, and did you want HTTPS and do you want auth and all those type of things, that's now incorporated in to the new project dialog experience, and it's dynamically rendered based on metadata that's contained in the template metadata in the package that originally installed it. Basically, there's a template manifest JSON file, and so we basically scaffold out that UI in real time. Rather than having to like go and customize and build forms and ship them every time we want to build a feature into the templates. So that's been a very long goal of ours. It's taken literally years. We've talked about being able to do that, and it's finally happening, which I'm very happy to see. And then over time, obviously, we'll promote that and enrich that, and hopefully there'll be a rich ecosystem of templates. And we'll obviously need to look at adding the what we call discovery and acquisition, discovery and acquisition phases of that into VS. Today, we only have it in the CLI. So if you go like .NET new foo and you have nothing called foo, well, what happens? Is there an experience at that point that helps you find, discover, and acquire a template that could satisfy foo? Today in the CLI, there's kind of a rudimentary kind of there is kind of an experience, but it's not great. And so we have an index file that gets calculated and downloaded by the CLI that has manually sort of scoured every package on NuGet to find ones that contain templates. And then when you run .NET new foo and you don't find anything with foo, it says, oh, is it in my index? oh, look, there does seem to be a package that has a template called foo in it. Let me print an error message that says, well, I didn't find one locally, but maybe this NuGet package is one that you would want. And then it can help instruct the user to go and type the next command, .NET new -i for install, to get that package. So that's a discovery and acquisition pipeline. We don't have that in Visual Studio. And so we want to obviously add something like that so you can go.
I didn't even know that was in the CLI.
Yeah,
I never tried it.
Today we've kind of limited it. We've limited its utilization, its experience, to focus on the templates that we wanted to ship for our primary experience, where we needed to do things like have a template for ASP.NET that in the SDK that supports the latest runtime, but also you can create an app that is targeting the previous framework, that's LTS. Because generally the idea with VS and the SDK in general is you have one version installed. You have the latest version installed. VS just keeps giving you the latest version of the SDK and the CLI. But if you want to create, so say that's 5, right? You want to create a .NET Core 3.1 template. We need a template for 3.1. It's not in the 5 SDK by default. It's separate. And so we have a way to kind of discover those, index them, and then if you run the .NET new web app dash, I think it's R for runtime, and then you pass in the version 3.1, it'll go, oh, well, I have a template called web app, but I don't have one, I don't have a variant of that takes the parameter value 3.1, but it's in this package. So go and install that, right? So that's how that mechanism works behind the scenes. But again, we don't have that in VS for like on-the-fly discovery, but we do plan on doing that. And so eventually, hopefully for the wider ecosystem, what you'll be able to do is create a template package that's based on the CLI, publish it to NuGet, and then naturally everyone's machines, whether they're running the CLI, VS for Mac, people will be able to discover that either by, having some type of, I searched in a search term in Visual Studio, I didn't find it locally, but then there's a one click to go and find that on NuGet, or perhaps it was pre-indexed and when you typed it, didn't find it locally, it suggested it to you. It said, look, I didn't find it locally, but I found these 4 that do have that search term in it. Do you want to install them, right? That's a pretty natural discovery and acquisition experience. And so they're the type of things that we're talking about.
There's a question from Jonathan too, just while you're talking about templates, do item templates get included here as well? Yeah, so the CLI template experience today doesn't really have a concept that separates project templates from item templates. They're all just templates, which has pros and cons. And so, for example, one of the cons is that if you go .NET new and let it list out every template, it just lists every template. Like it's not a particularly friendly experience, right? So it'll list like a razor page. And it's like, well, that doesn't help me. Right, yeah.
Right? Like if I do that, I can't do anything with it. But in VS, item templates are a separate concept, and the project system can limit when an item template shows up in a particular project or even a particular folder in a project. Like we can customize all that type of stuff. We don't have any of that in the CLI. As I understand it right now, there have been discussions to figure out what it means to use the item templates in the CLI and have those be VS item templates, but I'm actually not up to speed on where we are with that, whether that's currently. I don't think it's in the preview that we have right now. It's just the project templates and the new project dialog that are in there right now. But eventually that is the goal, that you just be able to, for .NET at least, or for templates using one system, and have them show up everywhere that they make sense, whether it's the CLI, Visual Studio for Mac, some code spaces thing, whatever it is, like you would want to show up everywhere. So.
All right, one more. I don't want to go too deep into this whole template thing, but there's a question here about private NuGet feeds and if that would work as well with templates. Yeah,
I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable question, right? I think today you can install from private NuGet feeds. If you know the feed URL and you know the package ID, you can .NET new -i package name, and then you can pass another parameter, which is the feed. With regards to one of this more smooth discovery and acquisition experience where you try and use a template that doesn't exist, and then it suggests one to you because it's indexed. Well, we're only going to index NuGet.org by default, obviously. So that's perfectly reasonable to ask, well, how would I add a private feed to that experience? And I imagine in Visual Studio, that would be a fairly straightforward process to do so. And at the command line, maybe it's a similar thing. You can run a command, it adds it to the template feed by default, and then from that point forward, you could index it and install from there. But we haven't designed any of that yet, as far as I know. If you're interested in that, go to the I think there's a templating repo, .NET/templating, I think is the repo on GitHub. and either find an issue and a comment there or create an issue.
All right. Well, we kind of went deep on that one area. There were a lot of questions going on with that.
Oh, let's go for it. Let's see if we can do some rapid fire answering then, hey?
Oh gosh. Let me see. All right, I'm taking a look here. Yeah, definitely a lot of thoughts on the whole rapid loop, especially with regards to Blazor. So that's a thing.
Here's one. Let me show this one.
Okay.
During development, it would be nice. Is that working?
Yeah.
I clicked show.
That was, we both clicked on it at the same time because I picked the same one.
During development, we could run without compiling like an interpreted language. Yeah. So it's actually interesting you say that. Obviously, there's a lot of the way .NET works, right? Is that the IL is what the runtime understands, the intermediate language, and you generally author in a different language. Most people use C#. And so you need to build the C#, run it through the C# compiler to get IL, and then that gives you an assembly, and then the runtime loads that IL, and then it can't execute it by default. It has to compile it down to assembly, and it does that using the just-in-time compiler, which is inside the runtime. It's a JIT runtime, right? Now, Mono has an interpreter. The Blazor WebAssembly actually uses an IL interpreter in the browser to execute your code. And in fact, Coursera or RuJIT has one now as well, but it's still very much in the early days. And so we introduced tiered compilation in the JIT. I think it was the last release in 3. And tier 0 is kind of the least optimized but fastest mode of the JIT. And there are experiments or current code checked in behind flags that do enable an interpreted mode there. Now, I'll say though, I don't think that's the thing that's slowing down the inner loop for most people. If you've already got your app running and you're doing editing and you change some C# code, and then you want that to get into the app as fast as possible, it's not necessarily the jitting of the IL in the app that is taking the most time, considering the delta. It's just that there's no intermediate today. Like there's no difference between you running the app for the first time for all the code and I changed one line of C# or a single HTML attribute in a Razor file. There's no difference between those two. Like you'd run through the full build pipeline. So we can get massive gains just by looking at or introducing some more complexity with regards to how much of that pipeline do we run given a particular type of edit that occurred between the last time that we kind of refreshed the application. And people will be familiar with this in .NET previously. We have this edit and continue feature, which was kind of much better supported in the existing .NET framework with Visual Studio, and we'd have a little more limited support for it in the newer frameworks. Like Xamarin has no support for it, but we demoed it at Build this year under the name of C# Hot Reload. And we plan to continue that investment and hopefully get that out to customers in the near future. Razor, CSHTML, and .razor files for Blazor don't have any support for edit and continue. So if you are using VS and you launch under the debugger and make a code change in those files, you have to shut down the debugger, recompile, and then launch again to see those changes. Your CS files, that does work for within the limitations of what edit and continue supports. And so we are looking at potentially adding support for those things and refreshing the whole edit and continue loop. Like, don't even think of the feature called edit and continue. Just think of the loop of like, I'm running, got my application running, the debugger may be attached, maybe it's not. And then I made a C# change and I want to get that change, or a Razor change and I want to get that change into my app. What can I do to make that happen fast? Like today, with edit and continue, you have to have gone through very specific steps to have that be successfully deployed. We're looking at ways we could just make that smoother, right? And so we could just say, hey, maybe we can just attach on demand. Maybe we know what processes your application. So even if you didn't launch with the debugger attached, because that's slower, maybe there's a single button and we just attach to it and we deploy any changes that you've made since you launched the application, assuming those changes are compatible with the limitations of sort of the C# reload experience or the edit and continue experience. And that would make it, a lot faster. The UX is better. So we're looking at all those types of ideas to kind of improve that experience.
Cool. Let me see. Here's one. I don't know. This one's pretty specific, and it's on Blazor and cryptography. So, and Dan's gone here. Question about Blazor WASM cryptography algorithms connecting to Azure.
Yeah. So my understanding is there was a change made between Blazor WASM 3.2, or like the first release, and as part of .NET 5, as part of this change where Mono went from using its own BCL to using the core framework BCL. And one of those was the crypto libraries. And we take our crypto libraries very seriously, as you can imagine, and we have a whole bunch of rules and guidance about how what crypto code we're even allowed to use. Like with Microsoft frameworks, thou shalt not use this crypto code. You can only use this crypto code, for example. And one of the fallouts from that was some changes with the crypto code when running in Blazor WebAssembly. Now, my understanding is we were able to get a bit of that back. Artak, you probably know the answer to this better. I think we made a change in one of the previews for .NET 5, and then we were able to get a couple of the methods back and working again. It was some of the hashing algorithms, because it was specifically, I think, some of the hashing algorithms were deprecated, but we brought back implementations. But I think this question might specifically maybe be about the browser. There is actually web crypto APIs now in modern browsers, but we don't expose those in Blazor WebAssembly, and we don't map those to the built-in cryptography types in the .NET BCL. And that's where my knowledge ends, and I wouldn't even attempt to try and make any smart comment or reasonable comment about that. So security is an area where it's just like, yeah, I'll let the experts talk about it.
Cool. Yeah. Let me see. Nothing else really coming up in the chat. I don't know if there's any specifics you want to talk about more. Like, so Artak earlier was sharing the kind of tool on the roadmap in general. I don't know if there's anything specific, because part of the goal Dan talked about is we want people to engage more and help us, like go through and upvote and talk about stuff. Is there anything else we want to share out on that? That's fine if not.
I will just reiterate the same ask, like, please go ahead, engage and upvote the issues you like, and downvote the issues you don't like, and put write the reasons for each one of these, because we read these comments. We not always reply because we just trying to save time, really, but we read all the comments. So please do so, and that will help us with .NET 6 planning a lot.
So I shared out the link too. There's this GitHub issue that you shared, and so there's kind of two things I'm picking up from this, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong here. But one is that you can go into an individual issue, and you can just vote it up or down as you see it. This one also here, there's people commenting in here, and they're including links. Is that something you want people to do in order to like say, hey, go check out this issue, this one's important to me?
Very good question, John. So I ended up slightly modifying and tweaking the content, the description of this issue with the warning side, because I realized many people have been just posting comments about what they like. So the ask here is just file issues. If you can't find an existing issue for what you need, file a new issue so we can easily track it and it won't get lost.
Cool. Okay, so just pop over here. Also, like as you go in, it's pretty easy to search for, Blazor, right, whatever, and see and find your existing issue and vote it up if possible, as opposed to like create a new one. And then you do have really good labels and milestones and everything set up in here too as well. So pretty easy to navigate around. So awesome. Okay. Well, this is all really great. I'm not seeing more, like anything.
.NET 5 RC2 just became available.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Website right now. So
release is going up.
And go and download .NET 5 RC2. And
is there a link I should put in, or is there a
just a dot.net, then go to download.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So one other thing I got to point out, which is really cool. So like number one, go to downloads. Awesome. And then we go to RC. And there we go. We've talked about this page in the past, Damian.
Yeah.
But there's some really good information here. And this gives you you can get the installers, the binaries. It gives a lot of information about, what level, if it's an RC, if it's preview, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Of course, for the 5.0, that's what you're going to see. The thing I want to point out that is awesome is this right here at the bottom. So we've been dog fooding on .NET 5, like since early on. We always jump into the early. So the site, my understanding from talking to Myra is there were some things that were 3.1, some that were 5, and basically now it's all 5, which is pretty cool. So like this site gets millions of hits, like, in a month, and so it's getting pretty good usage there. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's great that we're running it on the big public site. I run it on a couple of internal sites, and I update it with every preview. I know Hanselman, he's running LTS on his site. He's just moved his blog, Hansel Minutes, and his main site over to .NET Core. Finally, it's been a long process for him, but he's running LTS, and he'll need to keep that up to date, obviously, with the latest LTS patch, because we release every month. Someone did ask about, I answered it a couple of times, but someone asked again regarding my UPS just kicked in. I'm still running. Someone asked about, will there be releases between .NET 5 and .NET 6? And now the SDK generally releases every month. The CLI, so the .NET 5 or the .NET CLI/SDK will continue to release every month. And then we generally every month have a servicing round, right? So there are generally patches every Patch Tuesday, the standard Microsoft Patch Tuesday. There will be security fixes and other critical fixes for reliability, sometimes performance, behavior correction that will happen every month. And then the SDK has what they call feature bands, where we have to update parts of the SDK that align with things that also ship in Visual Studio typically, like NuGet and MS Build, the C# compiler, those type of things. They continue to rev, like they add features as part of the Visual Studio release train, which is pretty much 3 to 4 feature releases a year. And so we have to do updates there as well. So the first release of the SDK will be whatever, 5.0.100 will be the RTM or GA release of .NET 5's SDK. And then there'll be a .200 release and a .300 release at some point, .400. And they usually happen in conjunction with, as I said, Visual Studio or something like that. Now, as for feature releases between .NET 5 and .NET 6, we're not currently planning any. We're not planning any .1 release this time around. We're very much focused on trying to get down to this nice, predictable cadence of every year we have a feature release. We alternate between a current release, which has a whole bunch of new features, and an LTS release, which will have some new features, but is more focused on establishing a great baseline for our 3-year support. And then there's enough overlap to give folks time to plan and migrate off. If you just want to stay, if you're working on the type of things that can stay current, and you are set up to be able to deploy updates to the framework regularly, not just servicing changes, but feature changes with potentially a little bit of work you have to do, then just stay on current. Like you get a full year, a bit more actually, for the current release, because it's a 3-month overlap. So if you go from .NET Core 3.1 to .NET 5 when it comes out in November, you'll get that will be supported fully all the way through to 3 months after .NET 6 comes out, which will be November next year. So that means February 2022. And then as .NET 6 is developing, and we're doing the monthly previews, there'll be a release candidate, mid to late next year. You can start moving your apps over to that. And then when .NET 6 ships in November, you get 3 months to really cut over to that before the servicing stops and the support stops for .NET 5. So if you're set up to be able to react and deploy that quickly, then I strongly encourage folks to go at the leading edge, basically on the current release. If you need more time and you want to make sure that you can have apps and frameworks be supported without you having to deploy a new version every year, and when I say a new version that may include something beyond a fully compatible upgrade, then stay on LTS. Now, there's still monthly releases to LTS, so you'll still think about your patch cycle when targeting the LTS release. But you don't get away from that, right? But
that's something Scott Hunter pointed out when he was on the show recently. Is like, look, if you're concerned about staying in support policy, you need to install those patches. So it's not like you install .NET 5 and you walk away from your application for 2 years. You still need, if support's important, you got to install those monthly patches. And so then at that point, because I've seen some discussions on Twitter and people saying, hey, I'm not going to install until there's an LTS, because it's and my understanding too is the goal that it's supposed to be very quick and easy upgrade between 5 and 6. Like the goal is to minimize those breaking changes as much as possible. So
I understand that the move from .NET Core 1 to 1.1 to 2.1 to 2.2 to 3.0 to 3.1 and 2.2 went out of support. Like there was some less than easy transition there. But we're coming up to 4 years in now. This is the 4th release, despite and the goal moving forward is to make it as easy as possible for people to stay current. So move from and this starts with 3.1 to 5. Like the list of breaking changes for ASP.NET Core between 3.1 to 5 may look long, but I encourage you to actually read the list and look at the details. I think you'll find that you'd be very hard pressed to be hit by more than one, if any, of those changes. Most of the breaking changes in there are very, very narrow cases. And most applications will find it's very easy to move from .NET Core 3.1 to .NET 5. Whether they're your WinForms app, a WPF app, or an ASP.NET Core app, that move is pretty straightforward. Blazor obviously is the newest thing. So if you started on Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor Server in 3.1/3.2, and you're moving to 5, there might be a couple of others, especially WebAssembly, because it's changed its base underneath it. There are a couple of things, but it was literally the last release we had before 5, so there's not that on that. But yeah, moving forward, we are trying to make sure that it's pretty straightforward as possible.
Cool. I just wanted to share this. I believe this page just got a major update. And so this is the support policy, because people ask, and it's important, they want to see the exact dates. They want to have it clearly explained. And so, so they just shipped this. And the way that I got to this page was off of what is ASP.NET Core. And then there's a link over here to this support policy. I'm sure if you just search for .NET Core support policy, it would come up. So also good. All right. Well, we have been we're kind of at time. We've covered a lot of great information. Thanks, Artak. It was great to have you on and explain how you're doing the planning, and then if you're watching, please get involved. Share, file those issues, vote things up. It's cool to see how that goes directly into the team's planning. And now is that time too, right? This is the gate. This is 5 is kind of locked down. 6 is hey, you can really kind of dream big, or you can really prioritize. And so now is the sweet spot of when you can get that information, get your votes in. So.
And we know it's asking a lot. Like there's a new release coming, and so a lot of people will be thinking about that and spending time on that and trying out those new features or thinking about that. But obviously we're starting, like you said, we're planning the release after that, and so input really, really does help, and we do appreciate it when people do that.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thanks a bunch. So we stream, we have these shows every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for .NET Community Stand-Up. So if you're not subscribed, please do. And all right. Goodbye then.
Bye.